They run.
What does it mean to be human? Are we just breath and bone? Or something older? Something carved into the wind that moved long before names were ever spoken. Before kings, before gods, before the first stone was raised in anger or worship. There was this place, West Africa, a land of rivers that remember, of stones that once danced, of deserts that swallowed cities whole, and forests that still guard the stories we've forgotten how to ask. This was not a blank space on a map. It was alive, with laughter and hunger, with blood and dreams. We were not waiting to be discovered. We were becoming. From the cracked earth of Olduvai to the green savannas where the Niger bends, something stirred. A child stood upright for the first time. A woman wept beside a shallow grave. A man touched fire and watched the dark retreat. And slowly, across 3 million years of silence and storm, we carved a world out of nothing but dust and will. This is the story they never told you. Not in textbooks, not in classrooms, not even in whispered tales. But the bones remember. The rocks remember. The fire remembers. The past didn't vanish. It hid in ashes, in letters never sent, in bones buried beneath empires that swore they'd never fall. But now, we unearth them. We listen to the screams beneath the silence. We trace the fingerprints of the forgotten. This is not just history. This is memory, awakened. There are stories carved in stone, hidden in tombs, whispered through ruins. Secrets they never taught in school, because some truths were never meant to be told. Here on Secrets of the Ancient World, we don't just explore history, we decode it, piece by piece, lie by lie, until the truth finally rises. If you've ever felt like the past was deeper than what they told us, if you're drawn to the shadows beneath the pyramids, and the questions buried beneath centuries of silence, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to Secrets of the Ancient World and discover what was never meant to survive time. Darkness, not the kind that comes with night, but the kind before memory, before words, before we even meant anything. In this silence, beneath an ancient West African sky, something happened. A stir in the tall grass, a flicker behind the eyes of a creature that didn't yet know what it was. 3 million years ago, they were not yet human, but they were trying. Small, upright, barefoot beings, hair wild, hands calloused, eyes sharp, scanning the plains for danger, or maybe for something more. Australopithecus, hunched but hopeful. Their bones tell us they walked upright, that they carried infants in their arms, not on their backs, that they moved, not like animals, but like questions. Standing on 2 legs, they didn't build cities, they didn't pray, they didn't speak in the way we do now. But one of them looked at the stars, and for the first time, something inside whispered, "I am." Time passed. Thousands of sunsets, millions of footprints lost to wind and rain. And then, the hands began to change, more precise, more curious. A rock was no longer just a rock. It became a tool, a weapon, a promise. Homo habilis was born, the handyman. In West Africa, they picked up stone, shaped it, struck it, and shaped the world right back. They didn't just survive, they experimented. And every spark struck against a stone was a beginning. Now, fire, imagine it, a wild flame stolen from a lightning strike, tamed in trembling hands. Fire, the first god we could hold. And with it, we cooked. We stayed warm. We told stories with shadows on the cave walls. Not yet words, but rhythm. gesture, meaning. Homo erectus. They walked farther. They hunted better. They learned to wait, to endure. They stood at the edge of rivers, watching their reflection flicker, and wondered, perhaps for the first time, is there more than this? Somewhere near what we now call the Sahel, a child was born, different, smarter, quieter, curious in ways that frightened even the elders. She played with ash. She hummed to herself in sleep. She buried a dead bird with stones placed carefully around it. No one taught her that. No one had to. Because now, something had changed. Homo sapiens, the ones who know. And they did more than survive the chaos of climate, the terror of predators, and the brutal lottery of birth. They learned to remember, to carry pain, to pass on love, to fear time. Across West Africa, from the forests of what would one day be Guinea, to the cliffs of the Bandiagara Plateau, to the sacred groves of future Nigeria, they painted with ochre. They whispered over the bones of the dead. They sang while sharpening spears. And they began to imagine things that didn't yet exist. A future, a god, a name. This was no longer just survival. This was becoming human. One night, as the stars scattered like broken teeth across the sky, an old man sat before a fire. His hands were scarred, his eyes full of smoke, and he told the children, not in words but in sounds, in motion, in memory, of the time the rains did not come, of how they followed the elephant's trail to water, of how the gods hid in the sky, waiting to be found. The children listened, and they remembered. That moment, passed from tongue to tongue, from generation to generation, was the birth of culture. The fire no longer just kept them warm, it kept them together. So when we speak of prehistory, we do not mean a time when nothing happened. We mean a time when everything was happening, but no one was writing it down. We mean the mothers who died, nameless beneath acacia trees. We mean the children who carved stories into stone, hoping someone, someday, would understand. WWE mean the shaman who danced in the rain, not knowing if the gods were listening, but dancing anyway. They were us, and we are them. The rhythm of their heartbeat is in your chest. Their dust is in your lungs. Their fears live quietly behind your smile. This is where it all began. Not in Egypt, not in Mesopotamia, but here in the soil of West Africa. And though the world forgot them, the earth remembers, and so will we. Change did not come with thunder. It came quietly, in seeds, in silence, in stillness. Somewhere near the green valleys of what we now call Mali, a woman knelt in the dirt. Her hands pressed something soft into the earth, a grain, a gift, a gamble. And then she waited. That single act, humble, patient, and unseen, was the beginning of everything. Farming. Before kings, before coins, before the first god was ever named, someone planted a seed and waited. This was West Africa's quiet revolution. Not with swords, but with sorghum. Not with walls, but with yams and millet, with kola nuts and cowpeas. They did not write poems about it, but it fed the dreamers who would. Farming gave us roots, not just in the soil, but in each other. We stopped running. We started staying. And when you stay, you build. Shelter, storage, story. One harvest led to another. And soon, we remembered. With memory came rhythm, the pounding of grain, the grinding of stone, the ritual of sweat and survival. Music rose, not from instruments, but from motion. A woman stamping grain into dust, a child clapping to the wind, a hunter singing to calm his fear in the night. West Africa began to hum with life, And then came iron. Not lightning, not magic, but close. They heated the earth until it bled red. And from the fire came tools, sharper than bone, harder than stone. Somewhere near the Nok Highlands of what would one day become Nigeria, they shaped the future in flame. Axes to fell trees, hoes to turn soil, spears that pierced deeper than before. And with each spark, the gods watched. Or perhaps they were forged too. This was not just progress, it was power, and power whispers, then sings, then screams. Iron reshaped the land, but it also reshaped the soul. Communities grew, not just in number, but in memory. They made marks, symbols. They carved into rock, into clay, into silence itself. Early writing? Maybe. Maybe not. But meaning had arrived. Scratched, painted, etched by fingers that needed the world to see them. And then, stories. The ancestors were no longer just bones buried in the hills. They became voices in the fire, guides in the storm, eyes in the forest. Religion was not a temple or a book. It was everywhere. The river had moods. The tree could curse. The wind could carry a blessing. They did not need priests. The earth itself was sacred. Spirituality was not above them. It was beneath their feet, in the drumbeat, in the funeral chant, in the whispered name of a child at birth. The gods had no faces, only shadows, only echoes. But the people listened. And when the rain refused to come, they sang louder. When a child was born, they painted symbols on her forehead, not to control her, but to protect what she might become. The divine wasn't in the sky, it was in the people, and it moved. Trade followed, not of empires, not yet, but of survival, of curiosity, from the dense forests of present-day Ivory Coast to the edge of the Sahara. Hands reached out. Beads made of shell, cloth made of bark, salt, gold, honey, stone. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was free. To trade was to trust was to risk. And from risk came civilization. Paths became trails. Trails became routes. Routes became roads in memory. We don't always see them now, but they are still there, under the roots of modern cities, under asphalt and satellite signals and names we forgot how to pronounce. And then, a moment, one that no one wrote down. But that changed everything. A girl stood up, not in rebellion, not in rage, but in wisdom. She sang stories the men had forgotten. She healed with roots they had stopped using. She told the children that the gods were not angry, only tired of being ignored. And for a while, they listened. West African society was never just built by chiefs and warriors. It was shaped by mothers who gave orders while grinding millet, by elders who remembered which plants could kill or cure, by women who refused to be silent, and men who knew better than to ask them to. Innovation was not an explosion. It was a wave, slow, relentless, alive. And so, we changed, we planted, we forged, we traded, we sang, we buried, we believed. We became something more than survivors. We became story. And that story, whether whispered beneath a baobab tree or painted on the walls of a hidden cave, still lingers in the soil, still hums in the roots of drums, still breathes in the pulse of a people who never truly disappeared. First came fire, then came seed, then came the crown. Not all at once, not in gold or glory, but in silence, in decisions made behind woven walls, in councils under starlight, in blood spilled beside rivers with no name. Power does not announce itself. It arrives slowly, and it stays. In ancient West Africa, the soil fed more than mouths. It fed ambition. Villages grew. Loyalties deepened. Land became more than land. It became legacy. One family had more cattle. Another had stronger sons, and soon someone claimed a title older than writing. Leader, chief, king. The people called him the one who speaks for the ancestors. He did not ask. He was chosen by omen, by lineage, by fear. He sat beneath sacred trees. His words were not questioned. His voice became law, but power always has a shadow. What begins in balance shifts. The granaries were full. The walls rose higher. The men with spears grew bolder. Not everyone liked it. There were those who remembered the old ways, the ways before command and control, before land was claimed and borders drawn. They whispered in the dark. They sang songs of when the people chose together, not knelt, but the drums of order were louder. Now, a child was not just born. He was ranked, labeled, bound to the bloodline of his father, or forgotten. Now, gods needed interpreters, and the interpreters became priests, and the priests became gatekeepers between earth and sky. Shrines rose, not massive, not yet, but enough. Stone circles, carved altars, fires that burned through the night. The gods had faces now, and laws. What was once sacred to all now belonged to a few. And when one village had more salt, more cattle, more praise, another sharpened their blades. The first wars were not for glory. They were for survival, for balance. But war never ends where it begins. They fought over land. They fought over gods. They fought over the silence of ancestors and the noise of ambition. Men died, boys were taken. Women were counted like spoils. One war gave birth to a rule. Another rule gave birth to a system. Before long, every choice had a cost. Every life had a weight. And at the center of it all, a throne. Not of gold, but of fear. Power hardened the soil. It made the rivers run red. Yet in the corners of that rising structure, resistance stirred. A mother refused to name her son after the chief. A healer hid her knowledge from the court. A traveler came from the east, telling stories of lands where rulers were chosen, not born. But power doesn't fear rebellion. It fears memory. And so the past was rewritten. The songs altered. The graves marked only with symbols the living couldn't read. The victors built shrines. The victims became myths. Still, some remembered. They remembered the time when no man ruled the harvest, when the gods spoke through wind, not priests, when no one needed permission to speak with the sky. They told their children in whispers, in lullabies that sounded like warnings, and the children listened. Even within the kingdoms, power didn't sit easy. There were rival brothers, jealous daughters, advisors who smiled while poisoning the calabash. A crown given was never safe. A crown taken, never forgotten. The early dynasties of West Africa, though unwritten, pulsed with the same heartbeat that would one day echo in empires like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. But here, in prehistory, we see their bones, the first blood oaths, the first royal drums, the first war cries shouted into a morning fog. And the people? They adapted. Some pledged loyalty. Some fled into the forests. Some walked for months until they found rivers with no names and built again. A new tribe, a new code, a new hope. But hope is fragile, and memory is heavier than iron. The farther they ran, the more they forgot. And the more they forgot, the easier it became to repeat. That is the curse of power. It blinds the present, it buries the past, and it always thinks it will last forever. But nothing lasts forever. And soon, the walls would crack, the drums would go silent, the leaders would vanish into the dust they tried to command, because something darker was coming. Famine, drought, collapse. The gods would grow quiet. the soil would turn to ash, and the people would ask, in hunger and in rage, why did we stop listening? It began with the wind. A slow change, a shift in the breath of the earth. The rivers that once laughed began to murmur. The trees that once bloomed began to die. No one noticed at first. The rains came late. Then, not at all. The sky, once a generous god, turned its face away. The ground cracked. The cattle coughed blood. The yams withered before they could feed the child whose mother had already stopped singing. Famine does not arrive like war. It creeps. It waits. It watches you forget what fullness feels like. A village near the Senegal River fell silent. Not from war, but from hunger. The chief wept alone. The priests buried their altars. The people scattered. Some walked into the desert, hoping to outrun the dust. Others turned to blood, stealing, killing, taking what was left. And slowly, the world they had built began to vanish. Trade died, because there was nothing left to trade. Trust died, because too many promises had already been broken. Even the gods grew quiet. Drums were replaced by funerals, and no one remembered the last time they danced. In the far west, near the edge of what is now Guinea, a child was born into nothing. No name, no future, just dust and tears. His grandmother wrapped him in rags and whispered, "You were born under silence. Remember what they forgot." But what had they forgotten? Maybe it was the seed, maybe the stories, maybe each other. A once proud settlement in the cliffs of Bandiagara lay empty. Carvings still on the walls, bowls still on the ground, bones undisturbed. No invaders came. No fire touched it. It simply stopped. The people left. No one knows why. The earth, it seems, had taken back its breath. And in the forests to the south, a different kind of collapse. Not one of famine, but of trust. A leader, hungry for power, betrayed his own. He took from the granary and gave only to those who bowed. He crowned his son before the ancestors could speak. He punished dissent not with exile, but with death. And so, the people whispered again. Not songs this time, but plans. One night, the fire did not burn, and in the morning, the leader was gone. His body never found, only his crown, shattered at the foot of the shrine. But not all collapse is violent. Some is quiet, bitter, slow. A village splits in two. One side goes east, the other west. They speak the same tongue, but stop calling each other kin. A story is forgotten. A path disappears. A name, once spoken with pride, becomes taboo. Generations pass, and what was once a kingdom becomes a rumor. They tried to save what they could. A healer buried her medicine beneath a tree, praying someone would find it. A mother etched her lineage into stone, even as her fingers bled. A boy carved a dying bull into the cliff face, so the spirits would remember it was once strong. They tried. But memory is fragile, and without song, without voice, it fades. Rain came, but too late. Not to nourish, but to wash away. Fields became mud. Bones floated in rivers. Time lost its rhythm. And when archaeologists dig there now, they find sorrow written in silence. Hearths abandoned, tools broken mid-use, graves dug too shallow too fast. They find trauma, they find questions, they find endings with no explanation. What happened to the people of Unjugu? Why did they abandon their sacred cliffs? What happened in the forests of ancient Ghana, long before the empire? What storm came to the edge of the Sahara and scattered whole cultures like dust in the wind? We may never know, because sometimes the past doesn't leave answers, only scars. And still, through it all, some endured. A woman carried her dying child across the savannah, feet bleeding, heart hollow. But she walked, because someone had to survive. Someone had to remember. They buried their gods. They buried their leaders. They buried their names. But deep beneath the soil, beneath the ruins, beneath the blood and silence, something remained. A whisper, a seed, a song no longer sung, but not forgotten. And when the sun rose again, it rose on a different world. Not better, not worse, but changed. The people had lost their cities, their shrines, their kings, but they still had breath. And with breath comes memory. They are gone. The voices that once sang to the rivers, the feet that danced under the full moon, the hands that shaped stone and story with equal care. But they did not vanish. Not entirely. Because something remains. Something always does. In the soil, there are patterns, geometric engravings carved into stone before the first pyramids rose, spirals, circles, grids, symbols of time, of order, of a mind searching for more than survival. These were not just marks, they were maps of memory, of meaning. They speak to us still, but only if we know how to listen. In the caves of Togo and the cliffs of Mali, there are handprints, small, faint, faded. But there, a child once reached out and touched the wall, not to leave art, but to say, "I was here." That is legacy. Not gold, not crowns, but presence. Proof that someone lived. They left behind tools, chipped and sharpened, simple and sacred. They left hearths, still black with ash. They left bones, not scattered in chaos, but placed with care. The dead were not thrown away. They were laid down, wrapped, honored, returned to the earth, because they believed the earth would remember. And it did. In every West African drumbeat, there is an echo, not just of rhythm, but of memory, of footsteps along forgotten trade routes, of mothers humming while planting seeds, of warriors marching, not for conquest, but for home. That pulse you feel in the music, it began here, long before borders, long before empire, long before they were called primitive. They were architects of time, of tradition, of spirit. What else did they leave us? They left the gift of resilience, to build, to break, to begin again. They knew how to suffer, but they also knew how to rise. After every drought, after every collapse, after every betrayal, they did not disappear. They adapted. They became the ancestors whispered in griot songs, the unnamed tribes in DNA strands, the foundation stones beneath every West African city standing today. They left questions too. Who were their gods? Why did they carve those faces into the stone? What language did they cry in when the storms came? We may never know. But sometimes a question is a gift, because it invites us to imagine, and imagination is legacy too. Even their ruins are alive. A burial site in Senegal reveals layers of memory, not just one generation, but many, stacked like prayers, each life buried beside the last, as if death could be conquered through community. In Niger, in Mauritania, in Sierra Leone, archaeologists brush dust off forgotten sanctuaries. They find beads that once circled the wrists of women long turned to earth. They find charcoal, grain, ink that never met a book, and in those pieces, the truth. They lived, they ruled, they bled, and then they were forgotten. But not here. Here we remember, not to worship, not to pity, but to see, to say, we are not only the children of kings and conquerors, we are the children of those who knelt in dust and prayed to rain, of those who lost everything and kept going, of those who made tools from stone, and hope from hunger. We are not separate from them. we are their unfinished sentence. So when you hear the wind move through the Sahel, when you feel the pulse of the djembe, when you walk the red earth that once held empires made of clay and willpower, remember, they are not gone. They are in your hands, in your silence, in your survival. We build towers now, steel, glass, electric veins running through concrete. We call it progress. We look at bones in museums and say, they were primitive. They were lost. They didn't know what we know. But when the lights go out, when the noise fades, when you sit alone, staring into a fire or a screen, don't you still feel it? That echo, that pulse, that hunger to be remembered? They built with clay. We build with code. They planted with sticks. We plant with machines. But do we not kneel to the same fears? Fear of death, fear of silence, fear of being forgotten. We speak of nations, borders, ideologies. But beneath all that, we still bleed the same. We still tell stories. We still whisper names before sleep. We still bury our dead with care. Because even now, we are chasing what they were chasing. Meaning, belonging, legacy. And yet, in our progress, we forget. We forget the girl who sang the rain back to her village. The boy who carved gods into stone with no name. The elder who walked for days to plant memory in a child's mind. We forget them because we never wrote them down. But forgetting is a choice, and remembering is an act of defiance. They left no scrolls, no empires etched in marble, but they left us the earth, the rhythm, the breath. They left us the question, what kind of ancestors will we be? If we are the future they dreamed of, then what are we doing with that dream? Are we honoring it, or burying it beneath the weight of what we call civilization? Do we still sit beneath trees and tell truths? Do we still ask the wind for wisdom? Or have we made ourselves too busy to listen? History buries, but memory resurrects. And in these echoes of ancient West Africa, in the cradle of silence and sweat and flame, there is a voice calling. It does not speak your language, but it says your name, because you are not just watching history. You are made of it. So when the next storm comes, and it will we fall like they did? Or will we remember? Will we listen to the seeds, to the silence, to the ancestors who once carved futures with nothing but their bare hands? They lived, they struggled, they sang, and when they vanished, the world didn't notice. But now, we do, because here, in this space, they rise, they speak, they burn, they breathe. This is not the end of their story. It is only the pause before the next heartbeat. Because the dust remembers. And so do we. History simplified. Subscribe. Return. Let the past haunt you. Beautifully.